Well, hey, welcome to another episode of Comics Are Dope, the podcast. Episode 61 is what I'm really excited about. We've got a returning guest, Mr. David Pepose. I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation. We get into, Speed Racer and Captain Planet and everything he's been up to since the last time we spoke, which also includes an amazing year of Space Ghost comics. But before we get into that conversation, I just wanted to remind you that this Saturday is Free Comic Book Day, May 3rd, and there are tons of titles for you to pick up. I actually posted a whole roundup on the channel of the books that I'm most excited about. But if you have a local comic shop near you, or if you're not sure, visit comicshoplocator.com to find a shop near you. That way you can get the Speed Racer Zero issue, the Gargoyles Zero issue. There's a lot of books to be had. But if you're in the Raleigh area, my LCS, Fight or Flight Comics, has a huge event going on. They are bringing in a bunch of local artists, including my man Potsy, artist Ryan Best, Billy Parker, Ryan Rhodes, and Ryan Scheffler. So it's a whole Ryan party. So you can come get a sketch, get some signatures, grab some issues from these local talents, as well as get your free comic book day issues, of course. And Dan is bringing the dollar boxes out. So there are going to be a lot of comics to be had for, cheap prices. It's going to be really fun. Come out to Triangle Town Center Mall. They're on the first floor, just next to Hollister, right past the food court. You can't miss them. They've got a huge sign out front and a huge statue of the Thing hanging in the window. So super dope. Head out to Fight or Flight Comics. I won't be there, but I'll be there in spirit. And let me know how it was. Post your pictures on social media. Tag me and all that. Now, with all that said, let's get into today's conversation with my man, David Pepose. All right. Well, you guys, today we've actually got a returning guest today. And I'm excited about it. We haven't spoken in like a year, which it doesn't feel like it's been that long. But I'm here with one of my favorite writers, Mr. David Pepose. How you doing today, sir?
I am doing great, BJ. So good to catch up with you, my friend. I am so excited to talk all things comics. It's crazy. I guess you're right. It has been a minute since you and I spoken. The last time we talked, I think it was about Space Ghost when we launched the book. And so I'm really excited to chat all things Space Ghost and much, much more with you tonight.
Absolutely. I am too. Yeah, I will say that it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but clearly
we're picking up right where we left off.
Right. So, I actually wrote some notes, because I should have, right? And the question I wanted to really start with, like I said, we're catching up after a while. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's funny. We were talking just briefly before we started recording, and I was, busy is a freelancer's favorite four-letter word. I've been working on a lot of different books over the last, year and change, and seeing the response to all of them has been really heartening. And so, I feel like I feel very privileged to be able to write a bunch of different books that I really believe in, and so to see people really responding to them and seeing people really understand the vision, that's really all you can ask for as a writer. So I'm doing right as rain.
Nice. Yeah, it's been busy on this side too. Like, to close out the year, we bought a house and then had a baby in February.
Congratulations. That is amazing.
Thank you. It feels amazing, but then it's like trying to get back to some sort of normal routine.
Sure. I can only imagine, especially with the baby, that I'm sure you feel like the dinosaur right after the meteor hit. I can only imagine. I remember when my younger siblings were born, and it was just shy of my 9th birthday, and my whole life changed. So I can't even imagine what it must feel like for you. Congratulations. Those are some amazing milestones.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Excited. We were working toward both for some time, so worked out. But yeah, in the time since we last spoke, you've got a whole year of Space Ghost under your belt. And, we were here to talk about the launch. And I remember when we spoke, I had read maybe the first 2 issues ahead of the launch. And, I knew it was good, but I don't think any of us were prepared for like how good Space Ghost was.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. And if honestly, I wasn't expecting the kind of response that we got to that book. I really feel like Dynamite and Warner Brothers gave me and Jonathan Lau a ton of latitude on this book, and I think it really shows in the final product. I think for me, I'm a '90s kid, so I did not grow up in the heyday of Space Ghost, nor did I grow up in the heyday of Speed Racer, for that matter. And so there was a lot of research done when I was offered the project. And so I watched all the original cartoons and I took detailed notes. And, um, I mean, Coast to Coast was my introduction to the character, as was many people in my generation.
Hmm.
And Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's miniseries from 2005 also kind of like really stood out to me as like, oh, this guy could be a traditional superhero. But it wasn't until I watched the original cartoons that it became so apparent to me that Jan and Jace, Space Ghost's teenage sidekicks, they were core parts of the whole concept. You actually see Jan and Jace before you even see Space Ghost in the pilot episode. And that became kind of my emotional through line. I love writing these kind of found family sorts of stories, and the idea of Space Ghost being a widower and Jan and Jace being orphans and sort of coming into each other's orbit and not just evolving in their dynamic as crime fighters, but also as sort of a surrogate parent, surrogate children situation. That was really appealing to me, and that acts as sort of the emotional through line for our series that we then are able to scaffold in sort of a really cool villain of the month every issue, and that way we're able to inject different types of action and different influences and different tones and genres, and for a writer, that's a real gift, especially one who gets restless like I do. This gives me a lot of different opportunities to flex different muscle groups and hopefully show a range of storytelling. And I had no idea if that was going to work. I owe a lot of credit not just to the amazing team at Dynamite and the amazing licensors at Warner Brothers, but I've mentioned it to him before. My editor at Marvel, Tom Brevoort. I learned a lot. I've learned a lot from him over the years. And I took a lot of the lessons that he instilled in me and put them all into practice on Space Ghost. The done in one approach, for example, was something that we did in my Punisher miniseries, but the effect can only go so far with 4 issues. Doing something in a longer runway, 13 issues was my original commitment for this series. That really acts as a cumulative snowball effect. Every time you get to sort of end a story and start a new one, it's that much more investment on the reader's side. And so, yeah, I'm so glad to see that people have fallen in love with these characters just as much as I have. It's a book that feels very natural to me, and it's a book that I also am really grateful for Jonathan Lau and Andrew Dahlhaus and Taylor Esposito, who are just a power trio in terms of creative collaborators. And they really inspire me to bring my A game each and every month because they are leaving it all out on the field each and every issue. So I'm very excited for people to get to see what we have in store coming up in the months to come.
For sure. Yeah, because we're in the middle of a very interesting story arc
Yeah.
that'll be wrapped up here pretty soon. But I think you're right with the done in one approach. It's cool because it's like, you can pick up any issue and enjoy it. But if you're following the series, it also helps with the sort of passage of time, right?
Yeah.
Like each
It,
issue, we're getting different experiences, and it really feels like at this point, this found family has like become closer and closer and more tightly knit with each issue. I love that.
yeah. For me, if I have a formula to this book, it's always figuring out, what's the villain and what's the threat that they're gonna pose. But also, it's just what's the dynamic with Space Ghost and the kids in any particular moment. And sometimes that's one step forward, sometimes that's one step back. Sometimes there's something nice to be said for a little bit of backsliding on one or either parties, a little bit of tension and conflict there. But yeah, we're doing something, really fun right now. We're in the middle of our Council of Doom 3-part storyline, and this is something we've been kind of building towards since issue 1. Batman: The Long Halloween was a real big influence on this book. I love the way that Jeff Loeb and Tim Sal like they would introduce a villain each and every issue, and then it sort of built up to this big rogues gallery throwdown with Harvey Dent at the end of the series. And I thought that's such a powerful kind of structure, and it rewards readers for sticking around. And it's a very organic and natural way of escalating the stakes. And so, for those who've read issue 11, the siege of Ghost Planet has begun. Space Ghost, and the kids have had a bit of a falling out. And Space Ghost is by himself on Ghost Planet at the worst possible moment when the Council of Doom that's been assembled by RoboCore CEO Dr. Xander Abal, they all just descend upon him and just let Space Ghost have it. All of these villains have their own vendettas against the Space Ghost crew. And yeah, he's in over his head. And so we're going to see with issue 12 and then with our annual. How are our heroes going to turn the tide? And also, what's the real plan that RoboCore has been building to all this time since our very first issue? You're going to see that unfold in a big way in issue 12, and then the fallout of that is going to sort of extend through the annual.
Man. So not too much on this, right? But after the annual, I'm assuming we're launching into maybe another year of Space Ghost storytelling.
We'll be telling more Space Ghost stories. I can confirm that. Yeah, I'm so thrilled. I've been saying since the beginning. If you pre-order this book, if you show Dynamite and Warner Brothers that there is demand, there are more stories that can be told, and so I'm pleased to report there will be more stories told. You will get to hear more and more about that in the coming weeks. But yeah, I. Space Ghost has such an amazing rogues gallery, and it's not just limited to the Council of Doom. And we've been able to kind of tease that a little bit with the Energy Monster and Space Spectre, and even Lokar, who was not a member of the Council of Doom. And there were some other villains that I was sort of like, okay, if I only have 13 issues, this is what these are the villains that I need to use. But if we get some extra runway, there are a few more that I really enjoy. And so you'll be getting to see those in the months to come. Yeah, Space Ghost is I think what I love about him is that he's a character who he's equal parts Star Wars and equal parts Batman. And so there's a lot of different stories that kind of organically fit under that kind of umbrella. You're able to fit in a lot of different villainous archetypes, but also like you're able to inject all these different sci-fi twists. So we're going to be doing a lot of that. Suffice to say that like once Space Ghost has his final showdown with RoboCore, there are some really interesting things coming that you'll see in our annual that are going to complicate his life in some major, major ways and are going to set up the stakes and the threats moving forward for this next phase of our stories. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you to you for helping support it and to everyone watching for support and all the fans and retailers out there. If it wasn't for you, this book would be ending with the annual. But because of your amazing and tireless support, we're going to be telling more stories. And I'm excited to be teaming up with Jonathan Lau on the next haul.
That's awesome. So this is probably hard to do because it seems like the annual is kind of a culmination of a lot that's come before, at the same time as being a jumping on point, or a linchpin for something new,
Yeah.
right? But for those who may not have been reading Space Ghost and want to jump in with the annual, what's the pitch? What we got going?
Yeah. So it's tricky because I don't want to spoil too much. And I will say, if anything, our best jumping on point will actually be the issue right following the annual. Our annual is really kind of our big crescendo of sort of this first year's worth of storytelling. It adds some new wrinkles and complications to this ongoing Council of Doom threat. I think if you were looking to get involved with the book, you should definitely pick up the first trade because it really does down kind of what Space Ghost is and the whole status quo with the twins. But yeah, I think as far as this annual goes, you're going to get to see Space Ghost, Jan, and Jace just really step up and really rise to the occasion, just in some really big and powerful ways. Also, we're going to see, just the stakes are so much higher. We're escalating them in some really interesting ways. And I think it speaks to another lesson that Tom Brevoort taught me, which is superheroes. What makes them super heroic is not that they punch out the bad guys. It's not that they have superpowers. It's that they save the little guy. that they're the ones who kind of protect the innocent from bigger from threats that are bigger than them. And so we're going to be paying that off in a very big way. With Robocore's plan is something that's going to shake the universe to the core, and it's going to have wide-ranging implications. And so Space Ghost is really kind of the last. Space Ghost and his team are sort of the last hope that the galaxy has in this regard. And so, yeah, I this is sort of our big, the big fireworks at the end of the show. Because when I wrote it, when I initially planned this issue out, I was planning that I thought this was going to be the end, and it was so nice to know in advance, like, hey, we're going to do more, and to have that time to sort of plan out what we're going to do. We've already dropped some breadcrumbs, and eagle-eyed viewers, you'll have already seen it. We've made mention of a few things that you blink and you miss it, but it's going to pay off. And so you're going to see the fuse has already been lit in certain ways, and then you're going to see it get lit again by the end of this annual. It is definitely, if you want to know sort of what's going on with Space Ghost and what's going on with future stories, I'll say the last 3 pages of that annual are going to change Space Ghost and Jan and Jace's lives in a big and kind of unsettling way. That's going to sort of lead into the next era of stories.
Sheesh, man. So I'm excited. It's funny because we were talking before we started recording, and I realized in that moment that I'm an issue behind on Space Ghost. So last issue I read was issue 10, and I'm in this arc. I haven't started the Council of Doom arc yet. We've been in this story. We've been introduced to a space specter, uh,
Yeah.
and learned something very interesting about this character. I thought he was one person. Turns out he might be a different person. Crazy stuff. It,
I I was really thrilled with that Space Spectre story. It's one of my wife's favorite issues of the whole run, and it's probably one of mine too. Um, when I pitched it, again, writing Space Ghost is such a treat because I'm able to really inject all different kinds of pop culture influences and all the types of stories that I would want to tell. There's usually a way that I can tell it in the confines of Space Ghost, whether it's a horror tinge thing with Zorak or a heist in our Widow issue or something kind of like a long dark night of the soul like Jace versus Moltar. Even something that's kind of like Flowers for Algernon with Blip and Creature King. And so uh, with Space Spectre, I love time travel stories. You've seen it in stuff that I've already written, like Savage Avengers. And I wanted to do, if Space Ghost is sort of our Space Batman, the idea of Space Ghost versus Dark Knight Returns Space Ghost. I was like, that's really cool. Like, what would it look like if the future has come back and said that you're a disappointment?
mm,
And the issue's been out long enough. I can have some minor spoilers. Um, it was kind of a last minute change of the identity of Space Spectre. I spoilers, cover your ears if you haven't read it and you're behind. I had originally written it as playing it straight, that it was a future version of Space Ghost, that he's sort of come back all broken and, mad at himself. And I realized kind of at the last minute as I was about to start writing it, I was like, the idea of it being Jace from the future. It's a fun misdirect, but it's also it really does speak to, there's a melancholy streak to him, and you see it in our Moltar issue, but also the idea of the most innocent member of the team. He's lived through something bad and
mm,
he comes back in time, and it's sort of this unresolved resentment towards his father figure for letting him down. And the idea of sort of saying it's Dark Knight Returns Space Ghost, but really it's the Red Hood.
mm,
That's interesting to me, and that sort of is a fun way of being able to kind of expand the Space Ghost mythos and ultimately, fulfill my main goal, which is to make people cry. And so, that ending where where Jan, realizes, like, I can't believe I didn't realize it was you. Like, of course you're my brother. How could I not? Um, Yeah, that was a moment that I was really thrilled with. I was thrilled with the way that Jonathan and Andrew and Taylor really brought that to life. You're always rolling the dice with big emotional moments like that. You have to trust your team to really kind of stick the landing on that. And they did such a beautiful job with it. And yeah, it'd be weird if that was the last time we saw a Space Spectre. Maybe we'll see him again. Who knows?
I really hope so, right? But even that as a sort of, um, I don't know, like a sequel of sorts to that Moltar issue, right? Like thinking about where we leave Jace there versus issue 10. It's like there's so much in between now. Like this opens up so many different avenues like for future issues. And that's gonna be fun
Yes.
to go through.
Our Space Spectre issue is very important for a variety of reasons. And some of them and some of them you don't yet, but
Mm,
you will soon, I promise.
nice. So I, I'm gonna risk spoiling this book. So I'm just gonna we'll just stop and go to the promo, right? So
Yeah.
June 2025 is when the Space Ghost Annual comes out. And
Okay.
I'm excited about that. I mean, I have the do I have the actual date? Let's find it. June 11th. Man, man. So just over a month from the time you guys are watching this. Now, also in the time since we've spoken last, I mean, it's been announced, like your name's been attached to a bunch of projects that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Right now, Cable Love and Chrome is coming out. And that one I just had to be like, you know what, I'm gonna trade wait for this
Yeah.
because it debuted like as I'm moving. I'm like, there's no way.
I totally get it. I totally get it. Yeah, and that's going to be a really fun book. It's been fun to read it monthly, but I'm very excited for people to kind of also rediscover that thing as a single storyline because of the way that we've structured it. And in particular, Cable's such an interesting character. Again, the time travel of
Mm,
it all. And we sort of started that with a little bit of a slow burn in the first issue. But issues 4 and 5 are very time travel oriented, and seeing the way that again, this is something that Tom Brevoort, my editor, really I learned so much from him every time I work on a new book with him. He really was like, let's give Cable some flaws. Let's make him make the wrong decision. Let's let him be selfish. Let's let him be a little narrow-minded. Let's let him, kind of be challenged by this new love interest, Avery Ryder. And I think that's really added some really neat texture to this book, and it tackles some really thorny themes. I pitched the book as The Fault in Our Stars meets Edge of Tomorrow. And what the book is about is that Cable, after a time travel mission gone awry, finds himself stranded in a city where the techno-organic virus that he's been struggling with his whole life has become an ongoing concern. And so he meets a freedom fighter named Avery Ryder, who has the same techno-organic virus that he does. And so it becomes this conversation of how do you live with a chronic condition? Because I think that's Cable's real that's the parallel that I think is most interesting to me is that he's the same as somebody who has ALS or cancer or HIV or Crohn's or any sort of condition that is incurable or is chronic or sometimes even terminal. And how do you live with a condition like that? And also, if you know that your life, if you know tomorrow is not guaranteed because of it, how do you choose to go out? Dignity of choosing your own death. Do you die in a hospital bed? Do you die with your boots on? And conversely, if you know that tomorrow is not guaranteed, what are you living for? Because if you haven't found something to truly live for, then you're kind of just the walking dead and the virus has already won. And these are all conversations that Cable, as somebody who's never really met anybody else with the techno-organic virus, he's never had the emotional space to ask those questions, or to have anyone ask those questions of him. He's had supportive people, but nobody who truly understands what he's going through until now. And so, yeah, I think being able to weave in that sort of time travel doomed romance story with all the sci-fi high flying pyrotechnics that you need in a good cable story. Yeah, it's been a really fun little bit of counter programming. I think a lot of people, when the book was announced, were like a time travel romance story starring Cable. And here's the spoiler: I felt the same way when Marvel asked me to write a time travel romance story featuring Cable. But I think as people have read it, they realize like, oh, we're able to have our cake and eat it too. We're able to tell a good, solid, action-packed Cable story, but we're able to peel back some layers and really kind of get a sense of what this character's emotional life is, and why he does what he does, and hopefully, give him something to something that'll help him grow even further as a character by the time our story's over.
It's nice. So now I'm more excited to read it as if my reading pile wasn't big enough. Um, so you mentioned something. Oh, we've kind of referenced it a couple of times here, but so the pitch for Cable Love and Chrome was Fault in Our Stars uh, meets space movie. I think you said
Meet Edge of Tomorrow,
Edge of Tomorrow.
the Tom Cruise time loop movie.
Got you. Okay. And then earlier you referenced Flowers for Algernon in that one
Yeah,
Space Ghost issue, which was a short story that I had to read in sixth grade about this guy who he's in night school, like he's mentally challenged, I guess
yeah,
as you would put that.
yeah,
Gets the opportunity to kind of participate in this sort of clinical trial thing, some new miracle drug that makes him smart, like incredibly smart, for a short period of time. And we learned that like it basically is going to be the end of him. But it's all about like what he's doing while he's got the opportunity to really unlock his mind.
yeah.
Um, First of all, core memory unlocked. I'm so surprised I remember the full plot for that
I'm
short.
so glad. I'm so glad that I met somebody else who loves that story.
It was, there's not a lot of required reading from school that
Yeah.
I enjoyed and remember that well, but that was one of the best ones. And it had like a little, I don't know if it was a made for TV movie or what, but there was a movie we got to watch. It was great. All that to say, I guess all the best writers have to be well read, right? I remember watching an Alan Moore quote,
Yeah.
and he's like, talking about like that's how you get better at the craft. Like just read as much as possible, go find stories. Um, but how has it been for you, like in your journey? How helpful has it
Yeah.
been to
No,
go?
it's a great question. I think you need to have like a little bit of a bird's nest brain, like where you're always drawing from different things. And it's not to say that you can't, of course, draw from continuity and draw from previous comics, but I do think that it's less satisfying when you're just making comics that reference other comics. I think people kind of start to see it makes it harder to suspend your disbelief. Things feel a little bit more artificial. And for me, that's why I think I wear my influences pretty proudly on my sleeves. And it's one of those things. Not only am I, drawing from stories and books that I'm reading. For me, I'm a film guy. Like, and you know what? I should rephrase that. I'm a movie guy. Like I don't think I bring any pretensions to my work, but I'm the guy who was like, oh, hey, let's do supernatural version of Face Off. That rules. I think for me, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I think for me, doing these kinds of mashup homages is sort of my sincerest form of fandom. And so, I always am trying to figure out. I ask my wife all the time. I'm like, oh, what's my Inception? What's my Matrix? And those sorts of landmarks kind of help me triangulate. It doesn't always happen overnight. Sometimes it's a longer process, but I'm like, oh, I got to write Moon Knight City of the Dead, where I was like, that is Taken meets Inception. And so I think that like, I hope that kind of draws people in. I think also the benefit of all this, comics structurally have a challenge of uh, introducing themselves to new readers. Like it's not like when I was growing up where like my local supermarket had comics, not many of them, but enough for me to keep up with the habit. Now, it's like there are structural hurdles. You have to go to a comic shop, and people don't always know where those are. Sometimes they're not the most friendly places. There's the pre-order system, trying to navigate all that. And that's on top of, sometimes the stories are insular. Sometimes you're sort of preaching to, oh, you have to have read, years and years of shared universe history. I think for me, trying to kind of frame my stories in sort of cultural touchstones, it makes it a little bit more accessible. I'm always trying to think about what's the books, how are they going to sell on my table at a con? Where I'm trying to hand sell these things to people who don't necessarily read comics. But I'm a big believer that everybody has a favorite comic. They just don't know what it is yet. And I would like for it to be one of mine, because I'm not here looking to preach to the choir. I want converts. I think there's always room to build a bigger table. And that I think is a big influence on my work. And so while sometimes I pull out the hoity-toity, where I'm like, oh, Flowers for Algernon, but it's starring Blip, I think that has been a reason why I think I continue to sort of go back to my pop culture influences. Is that is a shorthand that allows me to connect with readers and allows me to sort of say, hey, this pineapple pizza kind of concoction that I've made up, it at least sounds intriguing to you. And I've benefited from that since my very first book, where I could say Spencer and Locke, it's Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City. That is enough hesitation to get people to say, oh, I'll read that. And so Space Ghost, I can say, it's Batman meets The Mandalorian. I can say for Captain Planet, it's X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. Speed Racer, it's Rocky meets Baby Driver. And that all sort of like people are like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I've heard of these things. Like, let me give it a shot. And ultimately, that's all you're asking is, will you give us a shot? And then hoping that sort of the execution will keep people invested in your work. So yeah, I'm always trying to kind of figure out like what's my next bit of influence. Particularly, are there any storytelling techniques that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I want to swipe that.
Mm.
The face off of it all, that we talked about. I did that for The Devil That Wears My Face because I love the idea of a body swap story, where you have somebody who they've got a very strong context and then it swaps with somebody that they hate.
Mm.
And suddenly they're both fish out of water, and one of them's going to kind of find their feet a little bit easier. It's usually the ruthless one. Whereas like the good person is suddenly in the lion's den and has to kind of like fight their way out. Stuff like that, I think is keeps me engaged as a writer, where I'm like, oh yeah, we could tell like an interesting story this way. Captain Planet, for example, I said that that's a superhero book meets a disaster movie.
Mm.
And so being able to like write sequences, especially in this current issue that I'm writing, where it shows that like climate change is right in our face. And, as somebody who's living in New York during Hurricane Sandy, living in LA during the wildfires, like, yeah, these things are very real and they have very immediate consequences, very dangerous stakes for people like you and me. So, yeah, I guess that was the long answer. I try to draw from whatever I can, whatever keeps the tank full, and whatever just kind of makes me excited. Because ultimately, once you've been in this job for any length of time, if you aren't following the things that interest you, you're going to get exhausted and your batteries are going to drain really, really quick.
For sure. Yeah. And you mentioned accessibility, right? And, you've been fortunate. A lot of the projects you've been working on as of late, they are these properties that were household names at a point. And so it's like that helps. But then even having these other reference points for, just your approach to the writing is also super helpful. Like, so these titles that are kind of designed to bring new people into the fandom,
Yeah.
they're great for me, right? Like, I came into comics because of a free comic book day event, right? I just walked my daughter to a comic shop and was like, hey, this is cool. And somehow I ended up with the habit instead of her. Uh, and every year I get really excited about Free Comic Book Day. There's almost always one book that I'm like, all right, I got to get there early so that they don't run out of copies before I get there. Last year it was Flash Gordon from Mad Cave. And then this year, that book is Speed Racer. Uh, just First of all, I didn't even know Speed Racer was an anime. Speed Racer used to come on like 10 p.m. on Cartoon Network, and it was one of those shows that like you just turn the TV on real low and
Yeah.
like hope your mom doesn't catch you like still watching TV that late.
I a speed racer. Well, the thing I want to say is you really hit the nail on the head, and it's funny because I've been writing sort of these nostalgia books for a year and a half, and I never thought about it till the way you just said it, which is you're right. Like that is a way to kind of bring in new people into the industry where people say, "Hey, I grew up watching Space Ghost. Oh, you're doing like a modern take on that." Same thing, Captain Planet. They're like, oh, I've been waiting for this thing to get relaunched. And Speed Racer is I think very similar in that regard, is that there's this huge cultural footprint for it. And I can tell you that when my editor Chaz Pangburn approached me at San Diego Comic-Con last year, I've worked with Mad Cave on The Devil That Wears My Face, my upcoming all ages book, 10-Ton Titan Terrier. And when I was doing a signing at San Diego for Devil, Chaz pulled me aside and he goes, "Listen, Chaz and I have talked a little bit over the years about different types of licensed work, and either the schedule didn't really work out for me, or I didn't really know that property very well. So I was like, I don't have the time to do the research on it." But he pulls me aside and he says, "Speed Racer. We've had a great relationship with Tatsunoko with our Gotcha Man series, and so we're looking to expand with Speed Racer. Would you be interested?" And I could literally, I could imagine the wheels turning, like just the Mach 5 just like burning rubber on the track, just like smoke coming from the tires, and I was like, for those who don't know a whole lot about my work, I love writing car chases. I've done car chases in as many books as I can. Whether it's Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2, we had car chases in both of those. The Devil Wears My Face, we had a carriage chase. Space Ghost, we have Jace steal the Phantom Cruiser, and we do have a fun Phantom Cruiser dogfight sequence coming up later on in the book. So I love the way that taking a static medium like comics and how do we sort of convey that illusion of movement,
Mm.
and whether that's the way you pace out panels, but also the way that artists kind of do that, whether it's David Aja and on Hawkeye, or Tradmore, huge influence with All New Ghost Rider, and now David Tinto with Speed Racer. And so the idea of being told, hey, we're going to give you a 15 issue runway to start, and every issue can have a car chase, I was just like, I'm never going to get that opportunity again. That is the kind of book the only other book that maybe that happens in is Ghost Rider, and given how crazy things are in the industry right now, I could see it being a challenge for a Ghost Rider book to go the distance for 15 issues. And so, um, I remember there was a party, a Mad Cave party later that night, and I pulled Chaz and I pulled our editor in chief, Mike Martz, aside, and I was like, I can't stop thinking about Speed Racer. Like, yes, this like a thousand times yes, count me in. And so I'm really excited for this book. It's Rocky in a race car. It's the story of how Speed goes from sort of he's just winning illegal back alley races to his journey in the Formula X racing circuit, and how does he go from being sort of a newcomer on the tracks to becoming a champion. And you'll get to see, especially in issue 1 and issue 2, how that sort of shift happens and why the stakes are so personal for Speed and why there's really no room for second place. But I'm so proud of how our free comic book day issue comes, because it really is sort of there's a no wrong turns kind of policy as far as this goes. If you pick up our free comic book day issue, you're going to get a really cool self-contained story about Speed Racer, and it's going to sort of explain what is Formula X, what makes it different than traditional race car racing, but also why is it so important to somebody like Speed? Why is it so important to the residents of Palm City, which is sort of the ultimate racing town? So, like my Space Ghost issues, that's a self-contained story. It's going to be satisfying. It's going to be really cool. It's going to set up our year plus worth of stories to come. If for some reason you miss it, I hope you don't, but if you do, we're not stepping on issue 1. Issue 1 is also a perfect entry point for Speed Racer, where we're setting the table, but in a different way. Where our free comic book day does a lot of the world building, whereas issue one, it's very emotional, and we get to see Speed, we get to meet his supporting cast, we get to see everybody kind of at the starting line, including Speed's relationship with Trixie, which we get to see them watch them meet for the first time. And so I think the thing that I love most about Speed Racer, and the thing that I think really resonates with me, is the idea of somebody who feels who follows their passion and wants to revolve their life around their passion. And it's sort of they need to basically step it up. They need to rise to the occasion. And that's something that I think I can resonate with quite a bit as a comic book writer. I live and breathe and sleep comics, but uh, that my relationship with comics changed when I became a professional comic book writer, and especially when I went from doing my indie work to suddenly being called up to the majors over at Marvel. You learn very quickly, oh, there's a learning curve, and oh, you better step it up, and oh, like this isn't a hobby anymore. This is a career. And you gotta kind of keep stepping up your game, or you're gonna fall behind. And at the same time, what I love about Speed Racer is that every member of the cast approaches it from a different angle. Speed is chasing after his brother Rex's legacy. And he's still trying to figure out, he's like, I'm meant to be a driver, but my father, Pops, does not want me to be a driver. Our family has been marred by tragedy. But at the same time, it's this thing that I love, and I feel that I have to chase it. And suddenly it's like, oh, I have to now compete in the big time. And can I hack it? And what do I have to learn in order to kind of make that work? Pops, meanwhile, sees cars through a design perspective. That he's the guy who, he built the Mach 5, but at the same time, he feels like he's been completely betrayed by this thing that defined his life. And so he's got all this conflicted feeling about Formula X, but at the same time, he's Speed's ultimate corner man. He's the guy who's like, eventually, he's like, I didn't want my kid to do this, but if he's going to do this, he needs training, and so that's got to be me. Um, Trixie is kind of a fun mirror image to Speed in that they're both about legacy. And that for her, she's the Carol Ferris to Speed's Hal Jordan. It's that when Speed winds up having to compete in Formula X, he needs to join a team. And the only team that's willing to take him is this kind of small rinky-dink operation that was owned by Trixie's father. And now she's running it. And so there's this fun kind of dynamic, this will they or won't they? They clearly like each other. They're clearly interested, but also she's his boss and he's the hot dog driver. And sort of like, how do they kind of, navigate that tension to become that couple that we know and love? Spritle is super fun. He was kind of the character that sort of it took me the longest to wrap my head around him, because I think he's the one that maybe is the most reflective of the time of when that cartoon came out. And so how do you make the Spritle feel immediate and engaging and not annoying or overbearing? So he's the color commentator. He's the guy who he's more of a streetwise hustler, younger brother. He's live streaming all of Speed's races. He's encouraging his subscribers to bet big. He's the one egging on all the bystanders to bet heavy, against his brother, knowing that he's going to win. So Spritle and Chim Chim are kind of a fun pair. And then finally Racer X, who, he kind of weaves in and out of our story. Mark Russell will also he'll be doing a backup story in our free comic book day issue with Racer X, and he'll be doing a Racer X miniseries spinning off of our book. He's Batman meets James Bond in a race car. He's the Vin Diesel to Speed's like Paul Walker, to use some kind of inexact parallels. But he's mysterious, he's cool, he's badass. He's the guy who, similar to Pops, he has some conflicted feelings about Speed on the tracks that are made all the more conflicted that nobody knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually Rex has to kind of decide, like, okay, like I get why Speed is doing this, and I get that it's very important that he wins, and he knows deep down he can't do it himself. So he's like, maybe if I help Speed, then maybe we can pull this thing off, and we can kind of thwart the corrupt influences that have started to trickle their way into Formula X. But yeah, you put all these characters together, it's a really just interesting kind of stew. And something that I think uh, that I didn't realize until I started writing it is none of these characters have powers. And you would think that like as having written primarily superheroes or primarily powered individuals for the last few years, it's fun. I love it. Don't get me wrong. The stakes are always huge and engaging, and there's so much interesting stuff you can tell with metaphor in terms of powers. However, sometimes it can be a crutch, and so it was really like a refreshing palate cleanser to be able to tell Speed's story where he doesn't have powers. He's flesh and blood. He gets by based on his nerve and his intelligence and his ability to think on his feet and his ability to listen to his supporting cast. And the only sort of elevated powers that we have it's always the cars.
Yeah.
And that's some fun stuff that we've got with Formula X is that every car has its own X factor to it. And so, every car has its own kind of signature weapon, whether it's Speed's cutter blades or whether it's, a skull and mace, chain or a fire, a firecracker rocket, I think is what we call it. Just different interesting signature weapons and sort of maybe like a twisted metal kind of sense.
Yeah.
That way, like, and there are a few wrinkles that all the cars get that sort of makes it go not just traditional racing, but a little bit of 4D chess. And I think it really leans into the strengths of David Tinto, my amazing artist and collaborator on the book. David and I worked on a chapter of Avengers Unlimited together a few years back. It was a She-Hulk and Captain Marvel team up. And I was so enamored with the sense of speed and motion and expressiveness that David brought to that work. And he's only gotten better with time. And so he is really leaving it all out in the field. I could not be more impressed with the way that he's doing it. And so, yeah, I think it's made for some really fun, exciting, over the top, larger than life kind of action. So we're able to have our cake and eat it too. If you've seen like the Speed Racer movie where that's like so like candy colored, larger than life, like we're able to kind of tap a little bit into that with just like, oh man, did you see what the Mach 5 just did? But also like we're able to kind of lean into this like vaporwave kind of, aesthetic. I think I described Palm City in my original notes as like a vaporwave Miami.
Mm.
That like it's a little grounded, but you get to see all the cool card tricks and ultimately, get to watch Speed's drama on and off the track. So it's a really fun book. And like I said, it's a long runway. We're doing it a lot like Space Ghost, so it's brand new continuity. You don't have to read or watch anything else. And it's going to be told almost exclusively in Done in One and Done in Two installments. So we've got a variety of really cool kind of rival drivers for Speed to deal with. And I can't wait for people to get to read this. It's very, well, I shouldn't say it's that different, but it's a little different from anything I've written. It's a sports comic first and foremost that sometimes has some crime elements in an industry that's not always kind to that genre. But I feel like Speed Racer is a name that has cachet, has that cultural footprint. And so I hope people will give this book a shot because I think, no pun intended, we're firing on all cylinders with this thing. And to see the work that David and our colorist Rex Locus and our amazing letterer Buddy Bowden, this is a fantastic team. And I think in a lot of ways, the approach that I started with Space Ghost, I feel like I am perfecting it even more with the Speed Racer.
I'm excited to read it now. I mean, I was already excited. Now I'm more excited. But man, so you spoke of leaving it all on the field.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a perfect segue. As we record this, it's Earth Day, which I guess we couldn't plan a better time to do this. Speaking of planning, we've got Captain Planet coming out here in just a few weeks. As you guys are listening to this.
Yeah.
And when it was announced, I was just like, this makes all the sense in the world, right? I think I reposted. Oh no, Dynamite sent me the news, so I got to post the cover relatively early. Yeah. And I was just really surprised at the amount of engagement that picture got. And it's thirst trapping Captain, like he's got a beard,
I'm gonna steal that. That's amazing. I that's a yes. You know, Captain Planet, boy, it's so funny. We're talking on Earth Day, 2025, April 22nd. 5 years ago, to this day, I posted on my Facebook saying, Happy Earth Day. If anybody gets the rights to Captain Planet, I've got a pitch that'll make your toes curl. Tagging, and I tagged a bunch of publishers, including Dynamite. And seeing that pop up this morning in my Facebook memories, I'm like, that's what we describe in the business as calling your shot. I Captain Planet has been my white whale for a decade. Literally, it was, I think, like the day the day after we announced it was 10 years to the day that I messaged my best friend on Facebook Messenger and said, it'd be cool if somebody did a Captain Planet relaunch. So this thing has been kind of a dream project for a long time, and I think it's because I love properties that have potential, especially overlooked potential. I think, not only is it advantageous for me as a writer, but I think, I know what it's like to be underestimated, and I prefer it. Honestly, I would much rather the bar be lower and then I can exceed that than the other way around. Captain Planet is one of those properties. I think a lot of people overlook it because maybe it was not particularly subtle in its messaging or its politics, and it was very much rooted in as a product of its time. It came out in 1990. And my response to that is, that's the purpose of modernizing something like that, is that you can kind of make it a little more timeless, or you can sort of inject in modern storytelling sensibilities. It's been 35 years. And I think ultimately, as far as subtlety is concerned, reality has gotten a lot less subtle in the last 35 years. And so for me, when you're able to get past that, there's all this potential to Captain Planet. There's the cast, which is inherently diverse and multicultural in a way that I don't think we've seen done that organically since the days of Giant Size X-Men. It is baked into the core of the concept. And I think that's something that's really important to me. I grew up as a Jewish kid in the Midwest. I knew instinctively that I was not part of the dominant cultural norm. And so I think having representation and inclusion in books is really important, because ultimately, like, it helps, I think, promote that message of, like, I want every group to have the kind of same rights and considerations and freedoms and ability to feel safe that I would ask for my family. So there's that. There's also the threats of Captain Planet are so timely. It's tackling not just environmental change, but environmental disaster. That's probably the biggest difference, I'd say, between when the show came out in 1990 and where we were at today. Is in 1990, it was still seen as a hypothetical. It was the hole in the ozone layer was sort of the big issue. And now, like I said, we're seeing wildfires in California, hurricanes in New York. My parents live in the Midwest. They had like 15 tornadoes hit last month. It's a disaster movie that we're all extras in. And on the flip side of it, what's fueling all this? It's human greed. And it's this sort of human drive to consolidate more power, and it's always sort of at the top of this corporate and government ladder. And who cares about the people on the street like you and me who get caught in the crossfire? And then last but not least, I think pop culture has caught up to it. I remember watching Avatar: The Last Airbender for the first time, and it's a huge influence on the way that we're doing this book. And I remember thinking at the time, immediately thinking of Captain Planet and thinking, like, oh man, like the way that they're bending all the elements, like that would have been such a cool thing for somebody if Captain Planet had ever overlapped with that. And then I thought, like I could do that. That could be like a really cool thing. And so we've pitched the book as X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, where it is a group. They're not even really superheroes. The Planeteers, they're not even a team. We get to watch them meet for the first time in our second issue. They all come from different walks of life in different countries, and they each have different contexts to the greater environmental conversation. They're ordinary people who are suddenly granted extraordinary power, and they find themselves on the run from a corrupt billionaire that's looking to exploit them. And if that's not timely in the year 2025, I don't know what is. And so when you're able to kind of, combine all these elements, no pun intended. You find like a really compelling kind of story. And so I just put finishing touches on the latest Captain Planet script right before we hopped on. And like it feels like a it feels like a fun superhero story, but also the idea that these characters are so rooted in their humanity. They don't have code names, they don't have costumes. They're ordinary people, and I think that's what makes them even more heroic. And then when they combine their powers, they're elemental rings of earth, wind, fire, water, and heart. They're able to summon the immortal elemental demigod known as Captain Planet. And he's yes, we've turned him into the thirst trap and captain. Love that. Our artist Amon Cosalos did a brilliant redesign, including his fiery hair and his amazing dad beard. And at the time, we just thought it was a really interesting design choice that really kind of stood apart. But also, I think it speaks to Cap, his whole persona. I want to put something out there just in case anyone's concerned. We're not doing like gritty Captain Planet.
Mm.
Dark Gritty Captain Planet is like I have zero interest in anything like that. Grounded, World Outside Your Window Captain Planet, that's interesting to me. But I think Captain Planet at his core, he wants to protect our world, he wants to protect our environment because he ultimately doesn't want to see anybody die. He's Superman with metamorphose powers. And so the idea of the dad beard actually works really well for him because he has this kind of reassuring, kind of fatherly mentorship, this calming aura that it feels timeless and classic and heroic and never goes out of style. And I think you put all these characters together, you get something really interesting. And I can tell you, having written now 5 issues of the book and about to hop on issue 6, yeah, this cast really has such a unique and fun and interesting chemistry, and I've really enjoyed writing every single page with them.
Man. So all respect due to Don Cheadle, but we're not
You
getting
know,
Don's.
I listen. If Don Cheadle wants to promote my book, I will never say no. But with all respect to him, like if I had a nickel for every time somebody's like Don Cheadle, I'd have a lot of nickels. And I remember when those Funny or Die sketches came out, and watching them, they're bleak even for me. And I'm the guy who wrote Grady Calvin and Hobbes, um, because yeah, like that guy is like deranged, like not Don Cheadle himself, Don Cheadle, Captain Planet.
Right.
And I get this idea that and I hear people say it all the time where they're like, oh, if Captain Planet were alive today, he'd be like beheading CEOs. And I think that that speaks, I think, maybe to a greater nihilism that we've sort of seen kind of seep into our general consciousness. And listen, things are bad out there. I don't blame people. But I think the superhero genre is meant to come from a place of optimism. It's meant to come from a place of a better world is still possible, that we can still fight for it, but we also, aren't we fight by it by staying true to our principles, and not just fighting fire with fire, because otherwise, I mean, I've written a Punisher miniseries. You can read that, but that's I think something that's so rooted in optimism and that building of a bigger table. I mean, Ted Turner and Barbara Pyle and Nick Boxer, who kind of put together the original Captain Planet cartoon, like that was all intentional. They were saying, that saving the world comes down to people like you and me, but it's also people from every walk of life, and that ultimately we have more in common than we have than we have differences, and we're stronger together than we are apart. And I think that speaks to a lot of core themes. I talked about growing up Jewish in the Midwest, but also, at the beginning of our talk, there's a 9-year age gap between me and my siblings. My younger siblings are triplets, and that experience I think really influenced a lot of my take of Space Ghost, of what happens when you're by yourself and then suddenly you start counting things in threes. But that's what I love so much about Captain Planet growing up. Was like when I was an only child watching it, I was like, oh yeah, like I made friends, and Captain Planet, the Planeteers felt like the ultimate friend hangout group.
Yes.
where they're coming from all these different places, but they all like find common cause and they all learn from each other and they all protect each and watch each other's backs. And that's the wish fulfillment for me, is that I wanted to have friends like the Planeteers. And I feel very fortunate that I do feel like I have, friends that, when their powers combine, they really are kind of my Planeteers. Uh, but getting to write them, yeah, like I think you guys are going to fall in love with those characters too. And I think Amon Casalos is a big reason why. I want to give him a quick shout out because, you know, uh, you see it. Jonathan Lau has had a long track record, and he's excellent because you've seen him on stuff like Green Hornet and Vampirella, and now Space Ghost, and that guy draws like a machine. Amon isn't a household name. I was not familiar with his work before we started working together. He's done books like Pathfinder over at Dynamite. I was so, and continue to be so blown away by Amon Casalos' work. He's one of the most talented collaborators I've ever had the good fortune to work with. He not only does this larger than life action stuff really, really cool, and you're going to see plenty of it, but also it's the character acting, the emotions, the expressiveness. He's got a style that's like a little bit of Gary Frank meets Steve Dillon.
Mm.
But also you see little bits of Doug Mahnke and Frank Quitely and like the finer details um and him working with our colorist Jorge Sutil and our letterer Jeff Eckelberry. It's a good looking book, but I think Amon really he is the full package. He came to this book hungry. And so when you fall in love with these characters, it's going to be because of just like the very deliberate choices he makes with the body language and the acting. I am so impressed with his work. And I think you will be too. So when you fall in love with the Planeteers, it's going to be because of Amon Casalos. And he really inspires me. Like I've told him time and time again, but I'll say it in public. Captain Planet could not be in better hands. He really understood the assignment, continues to understand the assignment, and it's every issue looks better than the one that came before it. So
Nice.
good times ahead.
So speaking of falling in love with these characters, right?
Yeah.
Like I gotta ask, my favorite Planeteer was Mati.
Mhm.
Growing up, I don't know, something about the haircut just
Yeah.
worked. Did you have a favorite before writing them, and has that changed?
Yes, to both. As a kid, it was Wheeler, because I think, the closest analogous character for me, I grew up in the height of Turtle Mania.
Mhm.
He was like the Raphael of the team, kind of the surly wild card, the tough talker, so as a little kid, like you respond to that. But having written the book, I mean, all the Planeteers are super fun, but I'll get into momentarily of who's my favorite. You know, a big objective for me writing this book was how do we take it from the year 1990 and really plant it firmly in the year 2025, the world outside your window, really kind of make these characters feel modern and recognizable. And so, and also, how do we make them kind of all feel like different facets of the greater environmental conversation? That they're all coming to this, whether they know it or not, from a place that feels organic to environmentalism. And so, Kwame, I pitched him as like Cyclops meets Sam from Ted Lasso,
Mm.
where he is a former soccer star who has suffered a career-ending injury, and so now he's walking around with a cane and a limp, and he's a farmer in Ghana, and he's trying to figure out like how what is my future supposed to hold now that my dream has been denied. And suffice to say, climate change is going to kind of put him on a new path very, very quickly. Wheeler, we've recontextualized as an auto worker from Detroit because I feel like for him that means the environmental conversation is very fraught for him. He's got a lot of he maybe doesn't necessarily buy it. He feels like it's had maybe an outsized impact on his own livelihood. And so, that becomes kind of the arc, not just his arc, but I think the theme of our origin story is like, why does any of this matter? Why does the Planeteers why should we follow them at all? Why can't we just turf this to somebody else? Why can't we just turf this off to a genie to wish our problems away? Because it doesn't work that way. Um, Linka is super fun. In the original cartoon, She was from the Soviet Union. She was the conservative planeteer. Things changed even in those original cartoons very, very quickly, as far as the Soviet Union was concerned. Um, so I Linka, we've kind of done like a 180. You see her right in the middle there. She's our most liberal planeteer now. She headlines like an underground eco activist band in the vein of Pussy Riot. And suffice to say, she's got some wrinkles to her backstory that add some interesting complications, of just exactly how much can she put her money where her mouth is. And so that adds some interesting wrinkles to her. There's Guy, who she's our marine biologist from South Korea. And in the original cartoon, marine biologist had just been a wetsuit and kind of diving around with the dolphins. But I like the idea of having a scientist on my team. It helps, just as far as storytelling is concerned, but also Guy is kind of the kid sister of the group. She's, I like the idea of somebody who loves science, who like gets excited by it, who's passionate by it. That means that people often underestimate her, though. They think she's naive. And I like this idea that no, she knows the stakes better than anybody. And so for her, hope is like this revolutionary act because the alternative is just to curl up into a ball of despair and just say it's all over. For her, she's like, I know what the stakes are and I'm going to fight for a better world. And then Mati, your favorite. Similar to Spritel in Speed Racer, Mati was kind of the one I really had to wrap my mind around because Mati unfortunately gets a bad rap from the original cartoon because he was this wide-eyed, innocent character who had the power of heart, and everyone's like, what's the power of heart? And for me, it's tactical telepathy. And so we've recontextualized Mati in a big way in that he's an indigenous person from Brazil who his people were being forced off their land by corrupt mining interests. And he was ready to fight back, I think, in a particularly kind of brutal way. And instead, he gets the power of heart and it cleanses his mind of all rage and violence and turns him into this avowed pacifist. And I like this idea that he can absolutely wreck you, but he chooses not to throw a punch because the power of heart can let him do so much more. It can let him summon animals. It can let him reach into your mind and make you see things that aren't there, or maybe dredge up your worst possible fears. Uh, he's our Batman. He's our Shang-Chi. He's like the X factor of the team. He's our smoldering, brooding Mati. And I think if people were surprised in a good way about sexy dad Captain Planet, like smoldering brooding Mati is like right up there. He's kind of quiet, and some of the Planeteers aren't quite sure what to make of him, but like he's the guy who kind of weaves in and out and always comes through in the clinch. He's the Planeteer who's like, there's an eco villain. All right, I guess I'll handle him one on one. So he's a very fun and cool character. And then since we have her on screen, Gaia, we did a really fun kind of rethink on that character. Um, the challenge with Captain Planet is you want to give these characters limitations and you want to put them on the back foot, despite them having like pretty fantastical powers. Um, for me, it's one thing to have Captain Planet in the back pocket as sort of like in case of emergency, shatter glass. But even then, we had to put kind of certain restrictions on him, so it's not just that the Planeteers just summon him once and then go out for lunch. Gaia was a similar challenge at first, in that if you have a second demigoddess in rotation who can teleport you back to her own private island, it makes it very difficult to have any stakes because they've got to get out of jail free card. So I wanted to eliminate that. So we've recontextualized Gaia not as a demigoddess, but as more of a Dalai Lama figure. That it's generational, that every generation a human being is chosen to house the primordial energies of our world. And so that kind of allows her to kind of set the fuse for the rest of our story, that she's the custodian of the five elemental rings. And when forces unknown invade Hope Island, sort of her Hail Mary play is that she scatters them around the world, Green Lantern style, to find worthy bearers of these elemental rings. And so I like that idea Gaia is the bridge between the human and kind of the divine.
Mm.
She's sort of that middle ground. And I think it speaks to Captain Planet's core message, which is the power is yours. It's symbiotic, you know. You can't just summon Captain Planet and say, all right, we're done. You know, this genie is going to wish our problems away because that's not how it works in the real world. It's got to be he can help, but it's still up to us ultimately. And so that idea of there being a symbiosis between Captain Planet and human beings and Gaia sort of being that conduit, I think it really spoke to the themes that I'm trying to tap into in a really natural way. Um, and it also kind of makes for some interesting potential for Gaia down the road in that, you know, she's the Planeteer's boss, but she's also human and she's still kind of a peer to them. And I think that offers some really interesting kind of storytelling grist for the mill for future stories down the line.
Man, no, I'm excited. I don't know. I feel like what I always say is like these books just seem way better than they have any business being.
I'll take it. You know, it's funny. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, which is, you know, not that long ago, licensed books were kind of seen as you know, treated like a dirty word. You know, that they were seen, oh, this is a cash grab, or oh, these are, you know, like they're phoning it in. And I want to give a lot of credit to Daniel Warren Johnson and Skybound and their Energon universe, because I think they really were the tip of the spear in terms of saying like, oh, hey, like a licensed book does not have to seem cheap. It does not have to seem homogenized. It doesn't have, you know, it can be, it can still have a degree of artistic expression to it. And I think people have really resonated with that. And I think Dynamite has really sort of fired the second salvo, I think, in a really impressive way, where you see it with, you know, what Declan Shalvey's doing and Thundercats and Terminator, you know, Johnny Quest, Herculoids, and you know, hopefully, you know, Space Ghost. And so, yeah, being able to kind of like take these properties that people know of, but they don't really remember them. They don't really know them beyond kind of these sort of hazy, half-remembered memories from their childhood to say, hey, what if these characters grew up with you? What if we did a modern take? And that way we're able to have our cake and eat it too, because it's all, for me, it's always brand new continuity. So that way, like, if you haven't watched an episode of Captain Planet or Space Ghost or Speed Racer, you can still just pick up issue one and you'll get a satisfying story that you can that's accessible to you. But if you are a diehard fan of these things, then you're going to be like, hey, I know that character. And oh, hey, look, that's a cool new take on Zorak. Or hey, look what he did with Duke Nukem. Or oh, hey, there's the car acrobatic team. And so it really is a win-win-win. And I think you really kind of put the last piece in the mental puzzle for me, which is like, you know, we want more people reading comics.
Mhm.
And so if they hear, you know, they might say, "Oh, Spider-Man," like, you know, they'll, you know, maybe they'll overlook that because they, you know, they've already got their fill from the movies. But they're like, "Oh, hey, like Space Ghost? I remember watching that as a kid. I'll give that a shot." Or, "Oh, I love Speed Racer," whether it's I love the original cartoon or I love the '08 film. You know, Captain Planet, I mean, and some of this is the timing because it feels so timely right now, but you know, we announced that book the day after the inauguration, and the response was quite overwhelming. Very positive, but I think people, you know, they I think instinctively know characters like Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Those are the types of heroes that can meet today's moment. That were often overlooked, and so yeah, I think being able to kind of say that, hey, like licensed books can be really cool and that there's a degree of freedom that we can be offered here. And I think, you know, people talk about, oh, is there reader fatigue, you know, or superhero fatigue? And I don't buy it. I don't buy it for an instant. What I think there is there are readers who are jaded, you know, because the big two universes have been so thoroughly mined. And so between having, you know, an easy, you know, subscription to, you know, DC Infinite or Marvel Unlimited, you know, people are like, oh, I can guess what the story is. And so they're not present in it. And social media does not help. I think it automatically prejudices people to become cynical and try to one up each other on those types of takes. Something like Space Ghost, Speed Racer, Captain Planet, those universes are largely virgin territory. And so people can't just pre-guess the story. And so then it encourages them to be present and it allows them to be surprised, which means that they're satisfied. And so, not to say that you can't do that in superhero universes, but I think it's maybe easier
Mhm.
way to do that in these licensed books. And I treat it all as value adds because I hope that people who maybe aren't Wednesday Warriors, they check out one of these books and they say, hey, I like what this Pepose guy is writing.
Mhm.
Maybe let me check out something else that he's done. I would love nothing more than for somebody to read one of my books and pick up the habit. That would honestly make my whole career to hear if that happened to somebody. Um, but I think these licensed books, they're clearly hitting a chord with the readership. And I think accessibility is part of it. And I think it's a way to build trust.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the watchword for the industry right now is that readers feel like they don't have trust.
Mhm.
And so every issue, especially, they want longer stories. They want something that can go the distance. I think miniseries are great in moderation, and I think there are certain stories that it works better for. But like I think readers are feeling a little burned. That they're like, oh hey, like I only have 4 issues of this series. Why should I pick it up in the first place? And
Right.
so these licensed books that are able to kind of go a little longer, it's like, oh, okay, like they can sort of build trust and say, oh, okay, Space Ghost is something that I know will be consistent over a year plus.
Yeah.
Then they start to trust the creative team. They start to learn our names. And I know it feels like very like basic, but I think that's how we continue to build up our readership is it's issue to issue. It's satisfying chunk to satisfying chunk. Have being able to have self-contained stories and then have a string of them. I think that's where the market trends are headed. And so it's nice to be able to be a part of that wave and see that it seems to be paying off.
Yeah, for sure. I love the licensed books, right? I'm newer to comics. I say this all the
Yeah.
time. I guess like if I keep saying it, I won't still be newer. But you know, for me, the big draw to superhero comics is the nostalgia. We watch these on TV and stuff like that, right? With these licensed properties, you kind of get the same thing, but without it being like, tired or played because there aren't very many of them. I never read
Yeah.
a Powerpuff Girls comic before Dynamite came out with one, you know?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to like, the idea of a shared universe has its benefits and it also has its drawbacks in that like you're able to pull from any different type of other book, but there's like the weight of the continuity and how do you tell a story with Spider-Man, for example,
Mm.
that feels original and fresh when you have 60 plus years of amazing Spider-Man stories that have come before you. Whereas, Space Ghost, like, you know, knowing that I'm like, oh, hey, I've written more Space Ghost comics than anybody. That's like cool. That's I love that. That's some fun street cred for me. And I think that yeah, readers aren't tired of comics. They just want to be surprised and they just want to kind of find what's the new thing that sort of scratches that itch. And it's not to say that I don't think, like they have their place alongside the big two, where I
Mm.
think like it kind of maybe even helps ease the load
Yeah,
on the big two that I think is right now being expected to sort of be all things to all readers, and it shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. And I think it gives a lot of jobs to really talented creators and me. So I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I'm so grateful to see how many retailers and fans and press continue to support these books.
for sure. Speaking of supporting these books, right? Free Comic Book Day is this Saturday as you're listening to this, May the 3rd. So you can go to your local comic shop. They'll have a bunch of comics you can pick up for free. They'll probably have other things discounted and stuff like that. It's a great time to get into comics. It's my favorite retail holiday every year. So you can pick up Speed Racer, their free comic book day issue. There's also a Thundercats and Powerpuff Girls mashup comic from Dynamite coming out that day. So
That
for
sounds
comic
fun.
book day, and then the following Tuesday, you can go and grab Captain Planet number one. Following Wednesday, excuse me,
Yeah,
Captain Planet number one's coming out, and then next month we get the Space Ghost annual. So there's a lot of new things that you can grab from David Pepose and Dynamite and all of David's partners, and I'm really excited about them, sir. You are one of my favorite
I appreciate
writers. You are. I don't, when I think about like sort of the new breed, if you
it.
will, like it's you and Jeremy Adams. It's like when I
That's
see
very kind of you. Jeremy's a sweetheart, and a very talented writer, and somebody that I'm proud to call a friend. And listen, for anybody watching, if anyone lives in the Los Angeles area and wants to meet me on Free Comic Book Day, I'll be doing two signings. I'll be at Collector's Paradise in Pasadena in the morning, and then heading to Golden Apple Comics in the city immediately thereafter on Saturday. And then on Sunday, I will be at the Comic Bug uh, in Manhattan Beach, I believe. Or maybe it's Culver City. You'll have to check the Comic Bugs website on that one. But yeah, so I will be doing three different stores on Free Comic Book Day weekend. Please stop by. I would love to sign anything you have. And also just thank you in person for picking up my books.
nice, nice, definitely take David up on that offer. We haven't even met in person. We'll make it happen,
We're gonna
probably
make that happen.
for sure. Well, David, thank you again for your time. Thanks for writing these amazing stories. I'm excited to get into them.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it. So good catching up.
For sure, for sure. So you guys, I don't know what you're doing after you listen to this or watch this. Hopefully, you're making your free comic book day plans and then staying safe, staying awesome, and reading something dope today. Peace.